Generic medicine. Generic medicines work the same as brand name medicines. FDA-approved generic medicines work in the same way and provide the same clinical benefit and risks as their brand name counterparts. A generic medicine is required to be the same as a brand name medicine in dosage, safety, effectiveness, strength, stability, and quality, as well as in the way it is taken. Generic medicines also have the same risks and benefits as their brand name counterparts. The FDA Generic Drugs Program conducts a rigorous pre-approval review to make sure generic medicines meet these requirements. In addition, FDA conducts inspections of manufacturing plants, ensuring compliance with the agency's regulations on good manufacturing practices. FDA staff monitor approved brand name and generic drug products to make certain that medicines at all levels of the supply chain, from the active pharmaceutical ingredients that provide therapeutic effect, to the final products being sold to consumers, are safe, effective, and high quality. In the event of reports of negative patient side effects or other reactions, the FDA investigates and may require changes in how medicines, both brand names and generics, are used or manufactured. FDA will also communicate any information to the public as warranted. Generic drugs must meet the same high standards as brand name drugs to receive FDA approval. FDA requires drug companies to demonstrate that the generic medicine can be effectively substituted and provide the same clinical benefit as the brand name medicine. Generic drug applicants must show the generic medicine is the same as the brand name in the following ways. The active ingredient in the generic medicine is the same as in the brand name drug or innovator drug. The generic medicine has the same strength, dosage form, such as a tablet or an injectable, and route of administration, such as oral or topical. The generic medicine is manufactured under the same strict standards as the brand name medicine. The label is the same as the brand name medicine's label, with certain exceptions. The generic medicine is bioequivalent to the brand name medicine. Generic medicines cost less than brand name medicines and have the same therapeutic effect. Generic medicines tend to cost less than their brand name counterparts because they do not have to repeat animal and clinical, human, studies that were required of the brand name medicines to demonstrate safety and effectiveness. In addition, multiple generic drugs are often approved for the same single product. This creates competition in the marketplace, typically resulting in lower prices. The reduction in upfront research costs means that they are typically sold at substantially lower prices. For example, a single generic competitor can lead to price reductions of 30%, while 5 generics competing are associated with prices drops of nearly 85%. According to the IMS Health Institute, generic drugs saved the U.S. healthcare system $2.2 trillion from 2009 to 2019. FDA established the Drug Competition Action Plan in 2017 to further encourage robust and timely market competition for generic products to increase competition so that consumers can get access to the medicines they need at more affordable prices. Patents and exclusivities can affect when and how a generic drug can be marketed. New brand name drugs are usually protected by patents that prohibit others from selling generics of the same drug. Periods of marketing exclusivity for brand name drugs can also impact the timing of generic drug approvals. Cardiovascular. Switch to generic CV meds in Medicare could save $500 million. Although brand name medications make up only a fraction of cardiovascular prescriptions in Medicare Part D, switching to generic alternatives could save an estimated $641 million each year, a new study suggests. Patients could save approximately $135 million per year by substituting a brand name drug with the lowest cost generic equivalent. Even after controlling for cash rebates available for some branded drugs, researchers report today in Circulation, Cardiovascular Quality and Outcomes. The patient savings are really the story here, senior study author Alexander Sandhu, MD, Stanford University School of Medicine, California, told. There's so many areas where there's financial toxicity in healthcare, and this is one very easy situation where there's really no trade-off. Where we can reduce patient out-of-pocket costs and the financial toxicity of their care, he said. I think it's really critical that the healthcare system find as many ways as possible to facilitate that. He noted that several studies have shown generic substitutes have efficacy similar to brand name options. Although they account for a large portion of annual drug spending, previous analyses haven't focused on cardiovascular drugs and potential savings from increased generic substitution. The investigators, led by Iris Ma, MD, also from Stanford, examined medication fill and cost data for 169 cardiovascular medications prescribed in 2017 for Medicare Part D. This included antiarrhythmics, anticoagulants, diuretics, antihypertensives, lipid-lowering therapies, pulmonary hypertension therapies, and other antihypertensives, such as combination therapies. In all, 122 medications were brand-name drugs, of which 90 had a generic alternative or could be replaced with individual generics. The results show that $22.9 billion was spent in 2017 on cardiovascular drugs in Medicare Part D after adjustment for rebates. Total spending was $19.1 billion, which included $4.2 billion in costs shouldered directly by Medicare beneficiaries. Roughly half, or $11 billion, was spent on medications available in both brand name and generic options. Although only 2.4% of medication fills were for brand name drugs, they made up 21.2% of total Medicare Part D spending. Medicare patients paid $330 million in cost sharing for the substitutable brand name drugs, the authors note. For 89% of branded drugs, the average cost share was lower for the generic version. They estimated that switching to a generic medication would cut patient cost sharing by $135 million. The top 5 drugs with the highest potential cost savings with greater generic uptake were ezetimibe, rosuvastatin, atorvastatin, olmesartan midazolam, and ezetimibe/atorvastatin. In a sensitivity analysis, use of the generic versions of ezetimibe and rosuvastatin, first introduced in 2016, would lead to $78 million in savings in 2018. Pattern variations. The researchers also reviewed variations in prescribing patterns at the state and clinician level. New Jersey, New York, and the District of Columbia had the greatest potential savings from greater uptake of generic formulas. Generic fill rates, however, were relatively similar across states with and without laws that mandate generic substitution for therapeutic equivalents. Data from 418,836 prescribing physicians suggest that the potential cost saving was relatively similar across cardiology, internal medicine, and internal medicine subspecialties. More than 50% of the potential savings, however, was attributable to a minority, 8.2%, of clinicians with 10 or fewer fills for substitutable cardiac drugs. Clinicians who rarely prescribe a drug might not necessarily know that there's a generic equivalent, suggested Sandhu. He noted that systems-level interventions, such as defaulting the electronic health record to display only generic equivalent options, have been shown to increase generic prescribing rates. Pharmacies and payers could also reach out to patients directly to encourage substitution by promoting reduced out-of-pocket costs. Real-time feedback from payers regarding brand name utilization with peer benchmarking may also nudge this minority. Preference for brands. But even outside that subset that prescribe a drug really rarely, we still see that there is a subset of clinicians that have higher brand name prescribing rates. And it's unclear to me whether that reflects something to do with their patient cohort and the preferences of their patients, which might be reasonable. Or whether it represents skepticism or doubts about generic equivalents, he said. I think there's a lot of possibilities and it's unclear from the data we have, why we have that concentration. Skepticism over generics. Concerns about the safety and efficacy of generics, largely imported from China and India, may be a big driver of generic drug hesitancy among clinicians and patients alike. Harry Lever, MD, a cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic and a vocal critic of American oversight of foreign drug manufacturers. The widely publicized recalls in 2018 and 2019 of generic angiotensin receptor blocker medications contaminated with potential carcinogens has only heightened concerns. What you have to think about is what does it cost to have someone readmitted to the hospital when the diuretic doesn't work? Because if the diuretic doesn't work, the hospital under Medicare has to pay a fine back to Medicare if the patient is readmitted within 30 days, Lever said. So, it's not necessarily saving money. Sandhu agreed that skepticism about the equivalence and safety of generic medications is a potential barrier. Generics afford an incredible opportunity to reduce the financial toxicity of drug costs and to improve the equity of care that we provide by having low-cost, affordable options. But I think it's incumbent that we have the data to demonstrate safety, and that involves continued close FDA surveillance of generic drugs. The authors note that they didn't have data on whether the clinician-indicated dispense is written to better understand the mechanism for lack of generic substitution. The study also did not account for differences in average doses, included generic substitutions even when they were more expensive than brand-name medications with rebates, and was limited to Medicare Part D prescription plans, which only includes adults older than 65 years. Sandhu is supported by a grant from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute and is a health policy consultant for Acumen. Co-author Rebecca Tisdale, MD, MPA, is supported by the VA Office of Academic Affairs Advanced Fellowship in Health Services Research. The other authors and Lever report no relevant financial relationships. The FDA defines a generic drug as a medication created to be the same as an already marketed brand-name drug in dosage form, safety, strength, route of administration, quality, performance characteristics, and intended use. The U.S. healthcare system saved almost $2 trillion from 2009 to 2019 in healthcare costs due to generic use, with increased savings every year. Despite this variation in cost, barriers such as lack of communication and education, previous side effects, or preference may play a role in continued use of brand-name medications. Having an increased generic product market will create competition and, ultimately, lead to lower drug prices and access to affordable healthcare for more patients. It is important that pharmacists educate patients and providers on the appropriate use of generic versus brand medications. The FDA defines a generic drug as a medication created to be the same as an already marketed brand-name drug in dosage form, safety, strength, route of administration, quality, performance characteristics, and intended use. Generic medications, therefore, are equivalent to brand-name products in terms of efficacy, quality, and safety. Abbreviated New Drug Applications, ANDAs, for generic approvals must show bioequivalence and that the active ingredient is the same as the brand name. They may differ based on the inactive ingredients, but these differences must be proven to have no effect on how the medication works. Hatch-Waxman Act. The 1984 Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act, or Hatch-Waxman Act, allowed for generics to be approved for market use without preclinical and clinical testing to ensure a generic would be lower in cost compared with its equivalent branded product. Generics range from 80% to 85% lower in cost when compared with their brand product. According to the IQVIA 2019 data, the U.S. healthcare system saved almost $2 trillion from 2009 to 2019 due to generic usage, with increased savings every year. According to a report by the Association of Accessible Medicines, AAM, 4 billion generic prescriptions were filled in 2018 in the U.S., which represented 90% of prescriptions filled in the U.S. However, this only accounted for 22% of all drug spending. Due to perceptions or past experiences with generic medications, some consumers continue to use brand-name medications despite this difference in cost, which may lead to an increase in consumer spending, patient dissatisfaction, and ultimately, a decrease in adherence. Answering questions or discussing the use of generic versus brand medications or inactive versus active ingredients with patients is an important role for pharmacists to help improve patient satisfaction, adherence, and quality of life. Having an increased market of generic products will create competition and, ultimately, lead to lower drug prices and access to affordable healthcare for more patients. Due to misconceptions and lack of understanding of the difference between brand and generic products, educating patients about the facts is vital. Studies have proven that overcoming barriers and educating patients and providers on facts of generic versus brand may help improve generic prescribing and ultimately help produce affordable healthcare. Pharma brands in India. You may wonder, where do prescription branded generic medicines in countries like come into this? There is the manufacturer or the brand owner. Then there is the doctor who is prescribing the brand. The patient who gets the brand name on their prescription. The chemist who interprets the prescription and provides the patient or caregiver with the right brand or drug. A pharmaceutical brand plays an important role across this entire chain of players. Some of the players only know the brand name, some know a lot more including the key ingredients etc. Do we really need so many branded generic medicines when their key ingredients are identical? Why can't all these branded generic medicines be sold under their pharmaceutical ingredient name? Why should a doctor prescribe a brand when they can just prescribe the ingredient name? Why can't the chemist be told to dispense only unbranded generic pharma products? There are reported to be over 3,000 manufacturers or marketers of pharma products. These products are made across India in over 10,000 factories. The number of stock-keeping units, SKUs, in the market may well exceed 1 lakh. The boom and the competition in Indian pharma manufacturing sector have also driven prices down. The Indian pharma market is the 3rd largest in the world in volume terms but only the 14th largest in value terms. While India's doctor-patient ratio may not be at world standards, they still have 1.3 million allopathic doctors, not counting the million or more Ayurvedic doctors who also prescribe allopathic medicines, and 1.4 million chemists. In the absence of a brand name, the chemist can and will dispense the generic drug he chooses. And given the fact that there are 10,000 plus manufacturing units in the country, the drug he dispenses may come from a poorly run factory producing substandard medicines. It is likely that these companies may flood the market with variable quality generic drugs and incentivize chemists with huge margins, causing a bigger crisis. Will removing brand names bring down prices? Yes. Government-sponsored Jan Aushadhi generic medicine counters are selling medicines at much lower prices than the branded generics. Will removing brand names make doctors become less amenable to deals with pharmaceutical companies? Yes, definitely. Only problem is that the power equation will shift to the chemist, not a welcome outcome. But only that consideration should not nullify the huge benefits that go to the poorer sections by way of lower drug prices.